Do you have, I was reading that Jared Diamond thing
Hmm.
this morning in the Wall Street Journal.
Big league advance.
Yeah. Do you have any idea, like as a percentage, how many minor leaguers participate in something like that?
I don't have a more recent number. I mean, there
Okay.
was a decent number a while back.
Wow. Crazy.
They are, hello, attendees. They're rolling in.
Yeah, they are. Oh, great. Perfect. So for the folks just coming in, we're going to wait just a minute or two as folks get into the meeting, and then we'll get started.
And to the folks watching, I figured that a virtual background, I know it's a little annoying in some ways, but I'd rather have that than y'all just kind of hanging out in my guest room, which has become my office during the pandemic. And, it's a SABR group. So I figure there's at least, dozen, if not, 50 people watching this who know what ballpark this is. So I was definitely wanted to make sure I went minor league if we're talking about the minor leagues, in the major leagues.
Love it. Love it. Well, it looks like we've sort of leveled off on people coming in, so I think we can go ahead and get this going. So, by way of introduction, my name is Scott Bush. I am the CEO for the Society for American Baseball Research, and thrilled to be joined today by my co-host, co-moderator, co-panelist, partner in crime for the discussion, JJ Cooper, with Baseball America. And we had this idea a few months ago. I would say it was probably this past fall, right, JJ, where
Well, we thought that this might be resolved by October, November 1st. I think we were thinking that we'd be doing this like November 1st.
Yeah, roughly. I think that's right. I think that's right. And I think we were getting towards the tail end of probably a 90-minute phone call where one of us said, we should just do this when everything's announced. We should just get together and have a conversation like this, which is how this all got started, right?
This did. And, so now we kind of want to share, our kind of conversations we've been having about what's going on and kind of share it with everyone else.
That's perfect. That's perfect. So we had the big announcement last week, and I think there's a lot of different topics that we can cover, but it's probably most productive to begin with sort of how did we get here? And in order to really walk through that, we kind of need to understand how we arrived at this place historically. So, JJ, do you want to share just a little bit about sort of the beginning of the relationship between Major League and minor league baseball, dating back to 1903?
Sure. So I don't think there's any way that we would have been in the situation, in the relationship that we had between the minors and majors up till 2020. There's no way that it ever would have formed that way if everyone had ever stopped at a point and said, okay, we're starting from scratch. How are we going to do this? It was much more of kind of an organic development over the course of more than a century. You go back, I mean, you can go back if you want to the 1880s and the first, the 1885, there was the start of kind of trying to legalize player movement from the minors to the majors and trying starts of drafts and all. I love the Rule 5 draft, and the origins of the Rule 5 draft really are MLB wanting ways to filter players up the levels through the minors, and really also minor league levels wanting to be able to acquire players cheaply, let's be clear, instead of buying them, at a high price. They wanted a way to be able to inexpensively acquire players and move them up the ladder. But 1903, I think the reason you had the National Association kind of form in 1901, but in 1903, you had the American League and the National League. You had this kind of, you had a point where contracts were no longer being honored between different leagues and agreements. And so eventually the way they resolved that is you had essentially the peace agreement that you had the majors, National League and American League kind of grudgingly accept, that, okay, we're going to deal with each other. But beyond that, there was also an acceptance. Okay, so now we're going to have this formalized agreement between the minor leagues, the different leagues in the minors who at that point agreed to be part of an organized system, the National Association, and the major leagues. And so that's the start of this. And that national agreement goes on till 1919. And in 1919, you actually had I think it was a 2-year stretch where there was no national agreement. That was kind of the last time that the minors were truly and utterly independent of Major League Baseball. Not that there wasn't still player movement and all that, but there was a new national agreement that, that in effect, I believe, for the 22 season. From then till 2020, there's always been an agreement that governed the relationship between the minors and majors. But you do that in 1922. At that point, you really are talking about, it's not an equal relationship, but utterly independent parties. You have minor leagues that are playing to win their seasons, to win their titles. And their titles, in their mind, are every bit as important. They're a smaller level, but every bit as important as winning the World Series or a National League pennant or an American League pennant.
Right.
And then you get to Branch Rickey shows up, and Branch Rickey says, I think there's a better way. And it's important because you say 22, this is right post Black Sox scandal. Branch Rickey has this viewpoint that the minors should exist to develop players for the major leagues. They are essentially a conduit to help the major leagues. And
Right.
Kennesaw Mountain Landis becomes the commissioner, and his viewpoint is, no. Whether you are in the 3I League or you are in the National League, these are independent entities, and the sanctity of their seasons should be important. And there's no other way to put it. Branch Rickey won. The commissioner of baseball lost this. There was a fight through the 30s, but you get to by the 40s. At that point, you are talking about a situation where more and more teams are owned or at least have affiliation agreements with major league clubs. And then the golden age of minor league baseball is up about 1949, 40, there are over 40 million fans a year.
So let's take one quick second, JJ, just to jump in. So in this time period, the Rickey Landis argument with Rickey winning, Branch Rickey obviously was very progressive in a lot of different ways, focused on player development. At that time, how many different independent minor league operations was Branch Rickey working with?
Dozens. There was dozens. I think it may have been in the high 30s, if I'm right. The one I remember most importantly is there was a league where Branch Rickey and the Cardinals literally either owned or ran every single team in a minor league, which which led to Landis literally at one point pointing out, so in this league, you have utterly destroyed you've made a mockery of this league, essentially. And so he declared 70 some players free agents, which didn't deter Branch Rickey at all. While Branch Rickey's doing this, the Yankees look at this and go, this is a good idea.
Right.
And then you have the great Yankees minor league teams. You have the Newark Bears. You have these teams that are powerhouses, because if you take what the Cardinals were doing at Branch Rickey, who later got jettisoned by the Cardinals and obviously goes to the Dodgers, and you take that and then you give them the financial wherewithal and the cachet that is the Yankees doing the same thing. Well, it doesn't take long for the Yankees to develop an exceptional minor league, farm system because of that.
So then, as we move forward, you were touching on the launch of the golden age of baseball. And so while there was the change to embrace the minor leagues as a feeder system to Major League Baseball, these entities still were operating independently. And that was a part of the proliferation of all of the minor league teams, where you had teams in markets like St. Cloud, Minnesota, right? If you propose putting an affiliated minor league team in St. Cloud, Minnesota today, people would think you were crazy, because there's nothing to suggest that that market would support that level of baseball, right? But during the golden age that you were just getting into, we had how many minor league teams throughout baseball?
I'm pulling out my encyclopedia of minor league baseball, which is very useful for this. I think we hit 400. You may have the number off the top of your head, but 470 or so. I mean, 1949, you literally had, if you were in a town that had a stoplight, you almost assuredly had a minor league team. Now, Were those players ever going to reach the majors? Zero chance in many cases. Were they ever going to reach full season? They're all full season baseball. Were they going to reach, Class A? No chance. This was, if you were a good high school player in your city, and I don't mean great, I mean good, you could probably play minor league baseball in 1949. I mean, that's just the way to put it. Like, if you are capable of playing in a summer college league now, you could play in minor league baseball in 1949, because the point of it was town ball in many ways that we go back, if you go further back, but it was done at there was a cachet of being a Class D league, which was 8 levels from the major leagues, but yeah. And so TV shows up, air conditioning shows up, and the golden age quickly turns. I mean, it's amazing how quickly it flipped. You go from 49, where if you ran a minor league team, you thought this is really great. And I should, one thing I left out, minor league baseball also in the 30s during the Depression is what invented night baseball. The minor leagues really saved themselves in the 30s because they figured out, instead of playing these games during the day, if we play them at night, more people can come. And as many times have happened over the course of the years, the major leagues looked at that and said, great idea, let's take that from the minors. So you get to the 50s, and all of a sudden it is survival. And by 56, you have MLB forming committees to try to save minor league baseball. And effectively, you start subsidizing minor league baseball. You get to the early 60s, and you get the utter reorganization of baseball. Class D, C, B eliminated. And a lot of these teams, they were jettisoned, but they'd already been jettisoned because a lot of these leagues had already died. But by that point, MLB essentially figures out a way to subsidize the minors by saying, we're going to pay for the rights to broadcast in your markets, which, try to think of this in 2021, of like, oh, I'd love to get, you complain about MLB.TV blackouts. Imagine if you said, I would love to watch a game tonight, but all the games are blacked out here because I'm in the Danville market, or I'm in the, Burlington market. And so I'm not allowed to see any major league games in that market.
Right. It's the first pyramid scheme in the history of the world that worked in reverse.
Yes. So, but this was really MLB trying to make sure the minors didn't die, because there was a legitimate worry at the time that if without MLB help, and MLB was already at this point subsidizing, as far as players, they in a variety of ways, they were starting to subsidize this. And then it shifted pretty quickly to, you got to the 60s and 70s, and really a lot of these teams were MLB owned. And not because they thought it was a great investment, not because of anything other than, we need to have farm teams. And the only way that we know that they'll survive is if we subsidize them.
Right.
And that gets you, so then you have these professional baseball agreements that are being renewed, 62/63. These are getting renewed, but they're really just, at this time, there's still an archaicness to them. You get into the 80s even, and below AA, there is no guarantee that you are going to have an affiliation agreement from year to year. And so teams are showing up and then they're disappearing. I lived not far from Macon, Georgia. I lived in Perry, Georgia growing up. And we would have the Macon Redbirds or the Macon Pirates one year, and then they would lose their affiliation agreement. They'd disappear for a couple of years, then they'd show back up. That was going on, stuff like that. But on top of that, still in the 1980s, technically a roster movement was not a major league move. It was a guy going from AA to AAA, was that the AA team assigned him, sold his contract to AAA, even though the MLB team was the one doing it. And then MLB paid a transaction fee to the teams for doing so. And eventually that finally went away in the, I know I've been way too long-winded on this, but this went away in the PBA agreement of 1990, in which MLB said, we're taking away a lot of these charades that we're doing now. Yes, we will pay the players, but they're also our players. They're not your players that we're borrowing. They're our players. And then they also said, for the first time in a long time, we're going to have facility requirements, which minor league teams thought at the time was going to kill them. And in fact, it actually saved them. It made for a second golden age, because all these ballparks ended up being built for minor league teams in the 90s, and which also led to the rise of independent baseball too, because you had all these ballparks that had been, parks that, and now you realize,
purposed.
right. They were no longer. And so, so they were repurposed, beautiful Midway Stadium in St. Paul, which Scott knows very well, and so that's the agreement that we had. And that went on, it was renewed multiple times after that with very little.
I want to bring up two quick things about 1990 and that change. So, the minor league owners felt like they'd lost to the degree in which there was a leadership change within minor league baseball.
They got rid of Sal Arteaga, bye-bye.
So we lost. We need somebody new negotiating these deals. The other point I'll make, there was at the time still an opening, the Rule 4 draft, which is really known as the first-year player draft. This is one of my favorite trivia questions, and I ask this of people regularly. So I'm sure a lot of the people watching already know what I'm about to say. But the Miami Miracle participated in the Rule 4 draft in 1990. And in fact, drafted 16 players, including Mike Lansing, who had a pretty long career. And at the end of that season, obviously that loophole was closed by Major League Baseball. But this is only 30 years ago. We're talking about 30 years ago. There were teams who were independent enough that they were participating in the first-year player draft as a minor league team.
One other addendum to that. You go back to the first MLB draft, you go back to the 60s, the first Major League Baseball drafts. Technically, so you had the major league teams drafted, and then after that, the minor league teams drafted. So it wasn't based on, the draft order was not, the Pirates pick one and then they pick again in the second round. The draft order for the second round was based on your AAA team. And by the way, there were teams that had more teams than others, so they got more draft picks. Eventually, they've changed that. But again, this is all of this to say, this was a system that really there was never, ever a moment in any of this where they said, what's the most logical system? It was always a system where essentially you already had a house and now you figured that you needed to add on a room. So you kind of tack on a room over here, or, oh wait, indoor plumbing's come along. Let's figure out a way to kind of put something together to make that work. And so that's kind of how this kept going. And that gets us, I'm going to just basically jump us ahead. That gets us to 2019, where both sides, the MLB and MILB, know that there's another PBA coming up. Another PBA agreement, their PBA agreement expires at the end of 2020. And both sides know that MLB is going to be asking for more. And both sides are utterly aware and utterly in agreement on that. MILB, I remember talking to MILB President Pat O'Connor in 2018, and he says, I know that we need to upgrade facility standards. You are not going to hear any argument from us on that because they haven't been upgraded that much since 1990. That's going to happen. And MILB, but the subtext of this is MILB is starting this going, we know it has to be different than the system we've had, but we don't want to change it too much. And then they find out that MLB comes out in 2019 and presents them with a proposal that says, we don't think that this current system's working the way we want it to work. We want it to go from 160 teams to 120 of, affiliated minor league clubs. And that's what leads us to today.
Right. And so within that negotiation, as they got started, what were the frustrations that Major League Baseball was bringing forward outside of facilities, which we already touched on?
Both sides were in agreement on facilities, but I think one of the biggies was what I call the high A problem. So you had for a long period of time, the California League had a number of clubs that I could only be described as, if the affiliations shuffle every 2 years. Every 2 years, MLB clubs, if they didn't already have renewed their franchise or affiliation agreement with minor league clubs, had to find a minor league affiliate. And let's just start with the MLB owners, who at this point are basically all billionaires, did not particularly enjoy the process by which the billionaires had to prostrate themselves to millionaires. Like that was not particularly enjoyable to them, that the owner of the Yankees or the Rockies or the Brewers or whoever it is, take your pick of whatever team, had to glad hand to try to line up an agreement with a low A or a high A club. But you had this high A problem, which is no one wanted to be in Bakersfield, no one wanted to be in High Desert, and no one wanted to be in Lancaster, all in the Cal League. Bakersfield had a terrible infield. The sun came down behind the batter's eye. You literally have to stop games because of sunouts until the sun went down. High Desert and Lancaster's problems, really beyond everything else, is that it's playing in Coors Field, but like if Coors Field was a crazier as far as offensive environment. Lancaster's problem is the wind blows out 40 to 50 miles an hour a lot of nights, and so the score can be 22-17 before you ever knew what happened, and teams didn't want that for development. So what you had over and over is teams would get stuck in Lancaster or Bakersfield or High Desert, and to avoid that, they would say, I've got to avoid this. What's the way I avoid this? I buy a team in High A. And so if you were in the Carolina League at the time, there was no team in the Carolina League where you're like, we couldn't survive being there. From a development standpoint, it's better. It was great for franchise values if you owned a Carolina League team, which also worked against the minors because it understandably presented an idea that the Carolina League owners were really against fixing this problem because it was artificially, in some ways, raising their franchise values by millions of dollars.
Right.
But it didn't get solved for really almost a decade. And finally, after the Carolina League at this point was almost half, you had a lot of MLB owned teams. Finally, they did take away Bakersfield. They took away High Desert. They moved them to the Carolina League, but the Astros and Rangers paid heavily, to move those teams to the Carolina League
that had previously not been successful.
Yes.
And so from a business operations perspective, there wasn't a ton of upside. It was all about player development. And that issue for me, for anyone looking for something that minor league baseball could and should have done differently, to me, it's all about that situation and the infrastructure that minor league baseball created to protect the leagues. And so, we're seeing this change now to really centralize how the leagues are run, where in the past we had league presidents, league commissioners that operated independently from the minor league baseball office in St. Pete. And it led to those leagues competing with one another. And that competition created a complete lack of movement, along with a desire on the part of minor league baseball to ensure that franchise values were not exclusively about the business operation. There was a lot of desire to ensure that, if you've got a certain level of play, that actually increases your franchise valuation rather than it being exclusively about your business operation. And those are the things that created a lot of, it really limited the freedom of movement to ensure that the franchises were located in places with the best facilities and the best conditions for player development.
And it also, the other subtext that was riding through this, which was something I think that MLB did take advantage of, was the MLB pitch was, we can do this at lower cost, more efficiently. And, there was at least some receptivity among minor league owners, because there was also another subtext of this, is that there were owners who were frustrated with, they felt like that there was a lot of overhead, involved in the minor leagues. And as Scott just laid out, there was multiple levels that they were, supporting, because you're as a team, you would pay league dues to pay the league. And then basically through merchandise sales and other things, you were also supporting, the funding of what was going on in St. Pete, or in so many cases, St. Pete was generating revenue, but a lot of that was going to support and upkeep what was going on in St. Pete. And so a lot of that wasn't filtering back down to the clubs. And that kind of left, I would say, in some ways, fertile ground for a lot of MILB owners to hear that. Now, that said, this presented a quandary for minor league baseball, because there's also always in minor league baseball, there's AAA, which has always had a very significant amount of power in minor league baseball on the governance side. And a lot of that is that AAA is like, we're the biggest clubs in the biggest markets. You know, go back to the PCL, thought that they should have been a major league if you go back to the
Right.
40s and 50s.
Right.
So there was a lot of, the AAA could do, you could really not get anything done in minor league baseball governance if you were trying. The president could do it, you know, to some extent, but the teams, if you're a league, if the Midwest League has an idea and they can't get AAA baseball on board with it,
right,
it dies. Now,
right.
if AAA wants to do something and they can't get Class A on board with something, they had enough votes to make that work. They basically had a veto, is really what they had over anything, essentially.
Right. And you know, I think the greatest example of that was probably at the 2007 winter meetings, where minor league baseball trying to figure out how they're going to divvy up revenue associated with the internet.
Yes.
And AAA essentially said, well, we're getting a bigger cut than anybody. And they didn't move. They just did not move on the issue. And that, you know, scars like that stay, right? And owners who are not AAA owners remember that for a very long time.
And to put it in a perspective, so if you're the Dayton Dragons in low Class A, Dayton is a more successful, Dayton generates more revenue. Dayton has more eyeballs. If you're selling a national ad campaign, a national sponsorship, Dayton is bringing more people. You are seeing, it's low Class A, or it was, you know, but it was more people were seeing that in Dayton, which sells out literally every game that they ever have going back, you know, for years and years and years. But you were seeing more there than you were in AAA parks in many cases. That said, the worst performing AAA club was getting a larger share and had much more political power, much more rights, you know, under the old system than Dayton did. And so all of these things were these little fissures that created what I would say is, you know, if you're MLB, these are opportunities in some ways when you're trying to do these negotiations. Because one of the things that they could argue was, and they've done, under the new system, you know, we're getting to the new system, but under the new system, one of the things they laid out was, we're going to base it off a ticket tax. The teams that have more people come through the gates are going to receive the larger share. If you brought 2% of all attendance in the minor leagues through your gates, you're going to get 2% cut. If you bring 0.02%, I don't care if you're AAA, I don't care if you're low A, you're going to get 0.02%. And so one of the things they did, one of the arguments they made was, this is going to be more equitable for levels below AAA.
Right. So we've talked about the changes, right? And obviously the big one is the number of teams, consolidation of 4 levels, 30 teams at each level, 1 per parent club. Outside of that, as the biggest change, what were the areas that Major League Baseball really honed in on within this reorganization to identify and say, look, these are the things that fundamentally we want to adjust about how the player development system is structured?
I think the biggest one is governance. And this is the one that's probably the biggest. Like, if you would rewind the clock, I think our first story was October of 2019 that MLB was proposing to cut 42 teams, because always 42 ended up being 43, but they had, you know, they were going to reduce it from 160 to 120, but they also ended up adding a couple of indie ball clubs to affiliate baseball. But if you'd have said then, there was nothing in that proposal at the time. There was no inkling, I believe, on the minor league side that this would end with the elimination of minor league baseball / National Association in St. Pete and Major League Baseball, and the elimination of league presidents and league offices also, and end with Major League Baseball running it. Well, what we ended up having is essentially MLB, in their way, I would say that they cut out the middleman. Basically, they have reached agreement with 120 minor league teams. They didn't reach agreement with the National Association, minor league baseball. They didn't reach agreement to do this with the leagues. They didn't say to the PCL or the Eastern League or whoever. They reached out to the 120 clubs they wanted to be in affiliated baseball going forward. And they had those clubs sign player development licenses directly with Major League Baseball. So what does that mean? there are no in-betweens now, for good or bad or indifference. It is now something where there is no, before MLB really had this, if MLB wanted to change things in the relationship with minor league baseball, they either had to get it put into the next professional baseball agreement, or get an agreement where minor league baseball, St. Pete or leagues or whatever, agreed to do something. That's gone now. Like now, if Major League Baseball wants to change a rule, now they're going to have an executive committee that is going to be 4 MILB owners, 4 MLB officials, and 1 neutral party. Oh boy, I'm fascinated to see who that neutral party is. I really am.
I know. SABR hasn't gotten the call, so I'm not sure who that's going to be. Have you gotten the call?
No, I can't be a neutral party and cover this. So, I'm fascinated to see who this is going to be. But so they'll have, an executive committee to be part of this. But at the end of the day, the commissioner's office has final say on pretty much everything in the minors now. And that's the biggest change, because there was a limit to what Major League Baseball could do in the minor leagues before this. And that limit is, they've taken the governor off of that. Like, it is now something where it is MLB run, and, and we will see a lot of changes with that. Like, I think a lot of minor league operators hope that if you go to a minor league game, you're not going to notice a whole lot of difference because of that. It's a good sign to them that it's not been kind of overly expansive what MLB's doing. But when the minor league schedule came out, MLB Network did a piece on it. I can confidently tell you, I don't ever remember that being the case before. MLB is now going to use their bullhorns for the minor leagues in many ways, in ways that they have not before. MLB will, I can promise you that MILB TV will almost assuredly be better going forward, because instead of it being a contractual relationship, which meant MILB's technology on their video product was usually about 5 years behind what MLB TV was, that won't happen anymore, because MLB is now going to say, now you're going to get our fire hose of, if you buy a ticket to a St. Paul Saints game, I promise you're going to also get stuff saying, check out a Twins game while you're here, because that's what's going to, all that interaction is going to be tied in together.
So let's talk about the business impacts for a little while here, because I think that they're actually pretty numerous for the minor league clubs. And I think many of them are positive, and I understandably, many people are receiving all of this change as incredibly negative news. And I do think that there are reasons for optimism, particularly for the 120 clubs. I don't think that the fire hose of Major League Baseball's marketing capabilities can be underestimated. It will make an impact. The ability to share fan data across the country and actually understand really fully who baseball fans are and how to capably reach them is going to be very powerful. And that's not something that the office in St. Pete was harnessing. So I think that's a net positive. The other thing, I think these 10-year agreements, the 10-year affiliation agreements, JJ, are going to be actually really great. You touched on earlier the carousel, the affiliate carousel, and there were markets where there was a lot of churn. You'd see teams in and out of there. Actually, Las Vegas for a time was actually one of those markets, surprisingly. And now it's not. But the downside of having that turnover is your market can really start to view you as less than. They start to question as consumers. Well, we used to be Royals, and this year we're Indians, but prior to that, just 6 years ago, we were the Reds. So what's going on? Why is it that we can't keep a parent club? And the negative reflection can impact ticket sales. So now a 10-year agreement, you get the opportunity to really harness that relationship, really showcase the parent club. The consumer starts to get comfortable with that identity, right? So that to me is a positive here. What are some of the other positives that you would take away from these changes on the business side?
I would say, I mean, there are positives. There are, it is going to provide, in most cases, I'm not going to say in all, but in most cases, I do believe it will provide a stability. Now, I don't want anyone to think right now that just because this is a 10-year agreement, this means that we now know what teams are going to be playing in what markets for the next 10 years with which affiliates, because I feel confident in saying that's not going to be the case.
Right.
There are facility standards in this, for one, that if a team fails to meet them after year 3, year 4, there is a grace period. You're going to see movement, But the other thing with that, and I will get into positive, the other thing with the 10-year agreement is, remember when I talked about that under the old affiliation shuffle, it really annoyed, MLB owners that they felt like that minor league teams really had a lot of the power in that. Well, now that's kind of flipped.
Right.
And the other thing about that is under the old system, it was very strict about you could not offer a whole lot of inducements. You really could basically say, we offer you a 2-year agreement. Now, teams would offer, on the side, like, hey, we'll try to see if we can bring you an exhibition game. I remember seeing the Reds play at Zebulon when they signed with the Mudcats, things like that. But overall, it was very strictly limited. Well, now what you're going to likely see, and there's at least a lot of concerns, understandably, among minor league owners, is that you have no guarantees. When this rolls around in 2031, if you get to 2027, 2028, and your MLB team says, we really could use like a pitching facility at your ballpark, or we need, an extra, like our weight room, we really need to be bigger. Under the old system, the answer would be, and again, maybe too much, but the answer would be, I'm going to have to focus. I've got $250K I could spend. I'm going to spend that in a way that'll be revenue generating. I'm going to put in a new, picnic area down the right field line that's going to generate revenue, and it's going to pay itself off. Whereas this pitching facility you're talking about is not going to bring in an extra dime, for my business.
Yeah.
Now it's going to be something where it's like, if I don't do that, is the MLB team going to jettison, me in a couple of years? And so the balance of power has really shifted in a potentially, because, sorry, I'm sidetracking on inadvertently out of this, but we saw it, right? We just recently saw it. If you're Trenton, which was the Yankees AA affiliate, and you go from being the Yankees AA affiliate to being an MLB draft league team, your franchise value, I mean this conservatively, literally $15, $20 million in value that disappeared the day that the PDL licenses came out.
Right.
The day that happened, that is millions of dollars that disappeared. Well, why did we see 120 teams all sign their PDLs? Because the option on the other side is okay, I can maybe make this go, but I know that my franchise is not worth nearly as much. Right. The balance of power has shifted on this. So those are, like, on the business side, that's the hurdle if you're a minor league team. The potential positives are, okay, MLB is getting a cut now, 50 cents of every dollar after expenses, after they take out the expenses of running the minors. Any hat that is sold, any Rocket City Trash Pandas hat that is sold, MLB is getting a cut. Well, the potential upside for both sides, and this is a potential one because we don't know what the revenue disbursement is going to be like, but MLB's sales pitch is, we're going to run the minors less expensively than it was run in the past. So they're taking ticket tax, but they're not taking league dues or the other assessments that they have in the past. And we believe, once we sell branding, once we sell uniform patches, once we sell a national TV deal, once we do all these things, that we're going to be providing significantly additional revenue to all of you teams and additional awareness in your community for all of these teams, because we have the ability to do that. And that's what we do. Now,
and they are taking the assets, both in park and out of park, necessary to actually execute that, which was historically a problem for the office in St. Pete, because again, as we discussed, there were AAA clubs and then other individual clubs in big markets that held a lot of power in those situations, where minor league baseball would try to put together a big partnership deal, and someone would hold out for more money, or they'd say, I've got an exclusive partner in that category. And they never really got it over the hump. They made huge strides, particularly once David Wright came on board, but they lacked the ruthlessness necessary to really turn that into a massive revenue generating opportunity. But Major League Baseball does not lack that ruthlessness. So they're going to move forward. And I think you're right. I mean, I think they're going to find significantly more revenue there.
Now, I'll say this with the ruthlessness. The other part that's the difficult one, and this is like when you talk to, AAA clubs, there are AAA clubs that had 10, 12, like categories that they had exclusive partners. And it's leading to a lot of painful conversations, because going forward, MLB is not letting them have. I think you get to pick one. You get beverage, and you can pick one, or maybe it's, right. I wish I had my notes in front of me, but there's a very small amount. And so every other one of these exclusive partners, you're going to have to go back to. If you have an exclusive deal with a car, a local car dealership, that's the Kia dealership or the Hyundai dealership, because I've seen some of those, and you're gonna have to go back to them and say, got bad news, going forward, you may be the official car of our team, but I can't promise you there's not going to be a Chevy Camaro parked right next to you that is the official car of, MLB's player development system, or whatever they're going to call it, and so those are it's absolutely, there are teams that, the argument that I've had made to me is, the more successful you were before, the less exciting this national merchandise sales and all is. Because if I'm a team that already sells out all of my inventory and has these great exclusive relationships and all, which by the way, get you a premium as far as how much money they spend and all that, I'm giving up inventory. I'm going to have to take between innings promotion that I sold before and hand that to MLB. I'm going to have to take exclusives and hand those to MLB. Now, if I'm a club, I'm not trying to pick on what used to be the Florida State League, but there are, if I'm a club that wasn't doing a whole lot before, this is great, because I'm selling inventory that I wasn't selling before.
Right.
And they're going to sell it for me.
I haven't even staffed to try to sell that.
Right.
And now someone's going to do
I may have to staff up just to provide the inventory.
Right.
Oh, I'm going to have to do between innings promotions. Well, I guess I got to do that now. There's that. But again, the argument is that I've heard, I think it's a reasonable one from minor league teams is that the more that you've already sold, that's the ones who are going to give up. Whereas the ones who hadn't sold anything, they're not going to give up anything.
Right. The floor is higher, the ceiling's lower. So there's going to be a lot less spread in terms of what these business operations look like, for sure. The other thing I'll mention, because we kind of moved on from it, but the facilities thing, if you were a general manager, a team president, or an owner, and you're walking in to see your landlord, so you're either going to talk to the mayor, the county commissioner, whomever, your list always starts with things that are going to benefit the fan and the bottom line. And the parent club's list always starts with things that are going to benefit the players, right? And those things constantly in friction, right?
It creates friction.
And so now, like you said, we are going to flip that a little bit, and it will be interesting to see, but my belief is we're going to have a similar outcome to post 1990, where I think there's going to be a second phase of new facilities across the country, because some of this cannot be fixed with renovation, because some of the things that the clubs need are the things that go inside the building, and whatever your existing footprint is, you can't change it. It's prefab concrete, right? It's not going to move. So I think in some markets, you're going to see, well, you know what, in order to keep AAA baseball, in order to keep AA baseball, in order to keep baseball, we need a new building because we simply don't have what we need for the players any longer, and there's no way to fix it.
I think two things with that are useful to note. Like, I mean, when you look at facility upgrades, pretty much every team across the country is going to have to do upgrades, because there are parts of this. I don't want to say that there are no teams out there that meet them, but the number is incredibly small, because there are things that just, even if you build a brand new ballpark very recently, they weren't. Nowadays, now you're going to need, and this is something that is needed, because we're seeing much more and more. We're seeing, female coaches on staffs, in the minor leagues and all. That did not, if you rewind to 1990, that just simply didn't exist. Well, okay, so you need another locker room, and we mean, it doesn't have to be, for 50 people or anything, but you need to have, shower, bathroom, all that simply, okay, so that's plumbing. So that's going to be an upgrade. If you have a clubhouse that's 750 square feet for your visitor clubhouse, and now you're required to have 1,000, in some cases, it's going to be interesting. If you built up, if you built up from a flat standpoint, and everything's above ground, you may just be talking about, if you have the space, if you have the footprint, you may be talking about knocking out walls. But a lot of these ballparks, understandably, they dig in, they build down, and then they put the stadium on top of it. Well, if all of that's below ground, it's going to be way more expensive if you said, oh, well, we've got to expand this clubhouse. In some cases, you're on a footprint where I don't even know how you're going to be able to do so. So you're going to have those, lighting in Class A, lighting standards have gone way up. So those are all things. Now, I mean, two things with that. One, we are absolutely in an environment now. I think there's a question someone asked, and I think it's a fair one to ask. We're in an environment now where the receptivity for public funding for stadiums is much less than it was 30 years ago when the 1990 PBA came along. So that's one hurdle that minor league and MLB teams are going to face. But two, there's something to be said for, if you have an old stadium that hasn't been upgraded in a while, you may be in a better position here, because if you have a stadium and the last significant work that was done on it was for the 1990 PBA, and you say, okay, well, we need to do upgrades to have this park ready for the next 25 or 35 or 40 years. Okay, that's potentially sellable. But if you open a ballpark in 2015, in 2018, and now you're saying, by the way, we're still going to be paying this off for the next 20, 30 years, but I got bad news. We're going to need another $3 million in upgrades. That's a much tougher sell. It's like, but we just built you a stadium like recently,
Right.
and we're still paying that off.
Right.
And, or in some cases, we built you a stadium in 2019 and 2020, and we may have to do some of this. That's going to be really difficult. And there is not wiggle room in this. I mean, again, MLB, this is what happens. This was not at the end of the day, I think one thing I left out to make clear, this is not an agreement. This was not a meeting of the minds where the two sides got together. When there were negotiations going on last year, when we talked about facilities, there were talks about, can there be a mechanism where you take money from the ticket tax and that could fund stadium renovations, or you could do this, you could do that. There was no agreement. MLB, the PBA expired. And eventually MLB said, this is what we're going to do. Do you want to join us? Not, this is what we would like to do. Do you all agree and ratify this? And so by doing so, those mechanisms aren't in there. And so if you're a minor league team, you know that these facility standards are strict and you have to meet them, or you run the risk of losing your franchise, your license.
Right.
But there are no mechanisms in there which says, by the way, MLB is going to fund this, or a group ticket tax is going to pay for this, or anything like that.
Right. I want to touch on one more positive from the business side, which is, and this came out actually of travel, and we're going to get into the player side of this in a second. But we're now looking at 6-game homestands, 6-game series, which is fantastic. I advocated for this when I worked for the St. Paul Saints in the American Association. It fell on deaf ears at the league level. One of the reasons being, when you're an independent ball, you do not like to have the perception that you are running things differently than the affiliated clubs are. So I'm thrilled to see this. And it does a couple of things. One, because there are travel restrictions that Major League Baseball is instituting that require games to start by a certain time if clubs are taking a trip of a certain distance or greater. By having a scheduled off day every week, now the clubs can start games at the time that they deem best for them, right? Based on how their market responds to various promotions. So that's fabulous. So that means Thursdays, there's no goofy start time on Thursday afternoon. We're going to start at 7 o'clock. We're going to sell beers for $1. Fabulous. The other great benefit for the clubs is half as many bus trips, right? So overnight, by instituting this, you're cutting your busing bill in half, and that's a fantastic expense savings if you're operating the team.
Let me just add, you're cutting your bus bill in half, which is good news because you just doubled your bus bill, because the requirement is you went from 1 bus to 2,
Fair.
So we've now equaled it out.
But I am on the record as being extremely in favor of these 6-game series. I think it's great. And I think that the years of how we got here, worrying about seeing the same pitcher twice in the same series, stuff like that, it seems just don't operate that way anymore, right? So it's less of a concern from a competitive perspective, and I think it's a net positive. So we touched on the facilities as a potential negative for the clubs. What are some other potential business negatives, JJ, that come out of this change?
Well, okay, I think it's the perfect segue into, we should just acknowledge there are a whole lot of cities out there that had affiliated baseball until 2019, and they saw their final affiliated game that they may ever have and never even got a chance to even realize that they were saying farewell, because obviously we didn't have a 2020 minor league season because of the coronavirus pandemic, which, by the way, has had a massive, it's hard to think of an industry. MLB got hurt by coronavirus. MILB, minor league teams, were ravaged by the coronavirus pandemic because MLB still had a 60-game season, and they still get rather massive checks from their national TV, their local TV, their, all their media contracts. There is no such thing like that in the minor leagues. And so you have teams that are literally, that were trying to hold on and then ended up finding out that they're out, that they're left out of affiliated baseball. And so in those markets, in those communities, there's obviously a lot of fans who, if you're on if you're part of SABR and all, you probably, you care, you actually show up knowing who your team is affiliated with and all that, like a lot of fans do not. And so that's an impact. And that's going to be one that, absolutely the financial impact of going from affiliated to, whether it's a partner league or whether it's summer collegiate wood bat, or in the case of Salem Kaiser, something else. And there's also cities, Lancaster, California, went from having affiliated high A baseball. It's not going to have baseball anymore. Right. It's just not going to have it. There are the impacts that have absolutely happened. And is one of those things that this is kind of one of the unknown questions about baseball over the long term with this, which is there are many fans who will argue somewhat, I see the argument of this is short-sighted in the long term because you have taken away baseball from these markets. Now, I'm trying to look at it with a long-term historical perspective. One thing I would say with that is that rewind this to 1949. If you're the Appy League, which before this was rookie level affiliated, and now you're going to be a Summerwood Bat League team, I don't know whether that's taking away the ability for fans in those communities to become baseball fans. I don't know if that's taking away your ability to love baseball. Now, it may be a little different, but I can't tell you that there's not going to be as many future major leaguers playing in those games, in the next 5 years than there were playing the Appy League. There were Appy League teams that literally did not have any future major leaguers on them. That didn't happen all the time. Usually there's 2, 3 per team, but there were teams that literally didn't have any. So I don't want to make it sound like, and Scott knows this better than I do. He was involved in indie ball for a long time. I love indie ball too. I don't want to make it sound like if you're a Kane County Cougars fan and you went from having low A Midwest League to being part of the American Association, that you've been stuck in the baseball desert now, because you're not. Like, there is something very enjoyable about that. And it's baseball. It's high level baseball. You actually, in Kane County, there's a pretty good chance that there are fans there who will be more able to recognize players in some cases going forward than they were before. Partly also because you also have players who will stick around for multiple years. That never happens in the Midwest League. You hope it doesn't, to be honest. It's a bad sign for the player if it does.
Right.
So baseball's baseball in different ways. So I don't want to make it sound like if you're either affiliated or you're, to be honest, I get, now we have to see, is MLB going to ensure that these new leagues are viable long-term? It is one thing. MLB has said that we're going to provide opportunities for baseball in these cities. And if you are saying that the Pioneer League goes from being rookie level to being a professional partner league that is viable, and when we're talking I'm not talking in 2031 that all 8 teams are the exact same 8. There may be a market where it doesn't work, but they find another market that it does. That's no different than what's happened in affiliated baseball for the last 150 years. But if you tell me that the Pioneer League is still going and still drawing fans like it was before, then I can't tell you that this is crushing baseball in the upper Midwest, but if you tell me that the Pioneer League lasts 2 years and then it fails, and then all you've got there is a few D2 schools and, Legion ball during the summer, well, then MLB has caused a lasting impact on baseball fandom in the upper Midwest. So those are the potential long-term impacts that we just can't know yet, because we can't know, is the Draft League, is the Appy League, is the Pioneer League, is the Frontier League, the American Association, the Atlantic League, is being a partner league going to be a good thing for them, a bad thing long-term, or just utterly neutral? We don't know any of those things yet, but those are all things we have to see.
Yeah, it's the unknown unknowns, right? And I will say this in regard to indie ball. If you were going to Kane County Cougars games, if you were going to Lexington Legends games, you're going to enjoy yourself just as much, if not more, moving forward than you did when they were affiliated clubs. Because you're exactly right. The thing that indie ball offers is the opportunity to actually have fan player relationships. Those don't exist at the lower level of minor leagues, because the players are so transient. They don't have the opportunity to stay in a market, because it's a failure if they're there. And so, to find yourself with a player who's 26, 27 years old, who's experienced and knows that they want to play in a given community for a summer, that's a fabulous thing, really, for the fans. And so, I will also say that there were moments in this where, understanding the disappointment of the clubs of maybe being left out of affiliated ball for the future, and understanding that anytime you're not picked for something, it's a disappointment. I will say, it's not a great sign of your business plan if you feel like you're going to go under because you're going to independent ball, because you should be able to make that work if you know what you're doing elsewhere in the operation. But I won't name any names. So in regards to the partner leagues, though, tell us a little bit, JJ, about if you're an independent league and you're a partner league of Major League Baseball, what is the benefit to the league of doing that?
Well, the benefit is that you are now much more part of the MLB system. So your stats are now going to be MLB run. You're going to have they're going to have technology at your parks, which hopefully, if you're a partner league club, I still love to see indie ball, but a partner league club, it means that you have a pitcher, you want to, in these leagues, you want to be selling to them that these are going to provide opportunities for you to either get back or get to affiliated baseball and continue your dream of becoming a major leaguer. Well, having TrackMan or some other device in your ballpark, that means that any pitcher who steps to the mound and throws MLB caliber stuff is noticed right away in 30 MLB clubs, front offices, is useful from that standpoint. And there is absolutely, and there is a belief in all these leagues that there is something very important the minute that the Atlantic League became a partner before this, where they were willing to try out things with MLB, and they got to set out a press release that had the Atlantic League logo and the Major League logo together on the letterhead. That was important because for a certain bit of your fan base, there is a validation that comes from being in any way tied to MLB. Now, there is a tricky part of this, though. You also have fans, understandably, in these markets, especially who have loved being indie ball. One of the sales pitches for indie ball has always been, we're independent, we do things differently, and we play to win.
We don't have rules.
Your AA team will pull up a guy because he needs the development in AAA, even if you're a game up with 2 games to play, and it means you lose the title. No one in the MLB club is going to hold off to do that. We are going to make sure that we do everything we can because we are playing for a title and winning matters here.
And the players stay. You'll recall the American Association in 2015. The Sioux City Explorers went 76-24. The Saints went 75-25, and they had to play each other in the first round of the playoffs. One of the most intense baseball experiences of my career was watching that series and how the players reacted. And none of the players in the second half of that season from either team, both of which those rosters had the opportunity to leave, right? They had affiliated opportunities. Those guys didn't leave because they wanted to be in that competition. They wanted to see who was ultimately going to win in the playoffs.
There are players who have gone from affiliated baseball to what was indie ball, and it has revitalized their careers. Why? Because it reminded them of what they loved about baseball, which is competition, and it was no longer all about my development because all I'm focused on is getting to the majors. And again, not every affiliate player does this either, but it became being part of a team and winning a title as a team. And there are concerns. I promise you that phones have rung in American Association and Frontier League front offices with fans saying, you're not going to do any of those dopey rules that MLB has made the Atlantic League do. I know this because I've heard this. And the answer is no, we don't. No, we're not doing rules changes like that. But that's the concern is that you become something different because now you are partners with MLB, whereas before you were the renegades on the outside. And the St. Paul Saints did that as well as anyone. We're going to do it. We're doing it differently here and now they are the establishment. They're the AAA affiliate of the Minnesota Twins.
The Berlin Wall has fallen. Let's try to get through a few of the questions in the chat. I'll direct most of them your way here, JJ.
Okay.
One of them is about the names, which we touched on briefly. So it would seem to be the end of the historic league names: Pacific Coast League, South Atlantic League, Florida State League. So what are we expecting? Are we expecting corporate partner?
If it doesn't happen, I would say that somehow they failed to sell it. I mean, that is a absolute part of this. Branding of either the totality or leagues is absolutely a part of MLB's plan. Now, I would say it is possible that brand ends up being, I think that they are finding that there is a lot of desire to kind of keep some of these names. So if you told me that it became the Stofers Florida State League, or it became the Pacific Coast League brought to you by whatever, Chevy or whatever, it wouldn't shock me that ended up being the end result. But I think that they're very much going to keep that fluid. I mean, there's a reason these names are as so utterly generic as that I can't remember them. Okay, that's AAA West. They're designed that way so that no one will ever let that stick in your brain, so that the minute that they can have a long-term name for this, no one will ever again call it AAA West or low A Southeast versus low A East, which I keep track of. Wait, which ones of these is the East versus,
Maybe we should launch a GoFundMe to see if either SABR or Baseball America could put their name on.
that would be cool.
So another question. You know, there is definitely an expansion of independent ball and collegiate wood bat.
Mhm.
What are some of the implications there? And I think of this more in terms of the baseball ecosystem. Like, what is our cultural carrying capacity in terms of how many baseball players are going to operate at that level, at those levels of play?
I'll start with one of the things I've always heard in indie ball for the last 20 years is there are an inexhaustible supply of players willing to play. And I think that is utterly true. There has yet to be a game called because there may have been games called because a team, like a professional team was failed to be paid, but there is yet to be a game called because they couldn't find enough players who wanted to play. Now, that said, if you go through this, okay, so we have almost 300 Division One schools, then we have Division Two, we have Division Three, we have 3 levels of junior college NCAA, and we have NAIA. It feels like we're getting to the point where any player who is a semi-regular or on, like a roster of those teams at those levels has an opportunity to play in summer wood bat, because the explosion of summer wood bat leagues, like if you told me that the caliber of play is going down, I'd utterly buy that. But that said, the other thing that is a hard question to answer is, okay, where is the demarcation line where fans turn away because the quality of play is simply below their level of expectation? And talking to minor league GMs and wood bat GMs and all over the last 2 decades, they will say, like, if you put on a good show, the caliber of play, unfortunately, if you're a baseball purist, is not a really important determiner of how well you do. And with that being the case, I think that it's a nearly inexhaustible supply. And again, with summer wood bat, we're getting there. We're over 200 teams now,
Right.
And when I say over 200, yes, there are 300 D1s, but the best schools, the best players often don't play in many cases,
Right.
because they shut down for the summer because they played a full college season.
Right. Here's a question about my favorite thing, the 6 game series. Ken believes the weeks would have been better as Wednesday through Monday rather than Tuesday through Sunday. That way you don't lose out on Memorial Day and Labor Day. Plus, you have the flexibility to play at night on Sundays. So a couple of things there, Ken. One, as it is, because there's a full travel day on Monday, I believe you can still actually play at night on Sunday. And the reason, at least for me, and I would also expect that next season we will see the schedules shift so that you can actually collect Memorial Day and Labor Day. I would expect the schedules will reflect that in the future. And the reason that Mondays, are not as good as Tuesdays is simply for group sales. Corporations are not going to do an employee outing on Monday night. They're gonna find the night, any other night than Monday, to do that. Let's see. Trying to find a question, a specific question about 2 markets. Any updates on Lowell or Pawtucket?
Lowell seems to be sitting out 2021 with plans to resume in some way in 22 and beyond. There are rumors bouncing around that I'm just not comfortable reporting until I actually have something to report on them.
Sure.
But, Pawtucket is kind of stuck in I don't have a great answer on Pawtucket right now. Pawtucket is kind of an example of, I want to be utterly fair with this. Like, again, if you are a city that lost your team, in this latest reshuffle, you understandably are very, maybe upset. Pawtucket is an example of how this often happened before, and it just never got national attention. Pawtucket was losing their team to Worcester before all of this happened, and they have a long and great tradition, before this of affiliated baseball. But if Worcester, they were moving to Worcester because of a new stadium and all that. I'm from the Middle Georgia area. I watched the Macon Braves. They had a Braves affiliate in Macon, Georgia. It's a perfect situation for a team in Georgia. And they didn't do upgrades to the stadium of a WPA stadium built in the 30s. And so that team moved to Rome. Now, at the time, it didn't make a blip anywhere else because it was only affecting Macon. But what we saw happen this offseason is, I mean, I understand there's a much larger ire directed when MLB is the one directing this rather than it being an individual team making a decision. But Pawtucket was unfortunately part of the franchise movement that's been a part of the minors for many, many years.
Right. Neil brings up a good question with regard to some of the clubs that are entering full season leagues. So we've got the former Northwest League is now a full season league. They normally were a short season league. And you've also seen, we've touched on St. Paul a couple of times. They're now opening in April as opposed to late May. And then when you go to the Northeast, you've got similar with some of the former New York Penn League teams coming in and coming on full season. So, are we expecting that there's going to be a lot of weather concerns as part of this new alignment?
There are some. There was actually a proposal at one point, I thought it was a pretty creative one, of saying, which would have also saved more cities, affiliated baseball, which was, what about you kind of have these split seasons? So that would have been not ideal on the coaches or the players necessarily, but like there was a possibility that you would say, okay, we're going to spend April and May, or maybe April through mid-June of these teams that will end up in the New York Penn League cities and end up in the Northwest League cities, playing in Arizona and playing in Florida at the complexes. Like you would have split the FSL. The FSL would have been a first half season where the player, during the time where it's a little less muggy in Florida and during the time before all of the snowbirds have headed back north. I mean, you literally could travel with some of them. Oh, it's getting hot here. We'll just, we'll hop a ride with you up to New York, to the New York Penn League. But, you could have done that. And you could have also done the same thing in the AZL, like had these teams play in Arizona and then go to the Northwest League in June. And it didn't happen. It's going to be cold and wet. It's not going to be snowy, like in most of these cities. I mean, it's going to be, I can't tell you that the weather there is going to be worse than it will be if you're playing in West Michigan or Lansing or, a number of Midwest League cities and a number of, AAA International League cities. I mean, if you're playing, in Buffalo, I can't tell you the weather's going to be worse in Eugene or Everett than it's going to be in Buffalo in April when they're scheduled to start. But that said, it is a factor and it is something. And you also have another concern. Like you have Eugene has a division, you are having these ballparks that are shared. And if you're sharing a Division I college with a short season club, there's not a lot of overlap. And so there's not really a lot of problems. But if you're sharing a Division I club and a full season club, you really have some issues because the college, if they're having a practice, they don't have a wide window. These players go to school. And if you're if at the same time, if you're the professional team, you can't say, okay, we're going to show up at 10 and we're going to do some, infield work and all, and then we're going to go home and then we'll be back, but we're not going to be able to have the ballpark again until 5. Those things don't work. There are some hurdles that are going to be worked through there.
Got it. We haven't touched a ton on player development. So there's 2 questions. And first one I want to take from Catherine here. We've seen the lower levels in the minor leagues, particularly over the last 30 years, has been a lot more players from Latin America and the Caribbean come through minor league baseball. Mm-hmm. What do we think of the reduction in minor league teams as it relates to player development? But specifically, I think that for me, there's a question about what that does for players who maybe don't speak English as a first language.
I think there's one good development and there's one rough one. The good development, and it's a minor one, but I think it is a useful one, is flipping of high A and low A. Florida State League going from high A to low A, and to some extent, the California League going from high A to low A means you're going, especially the Florida State League though, that's going to help like as that adjustment period. There is absolutely, heard it 1,000 times. If you're a player from the Dominican, it does not get all that cold in the Dominican Republic, understandably. And you then go, okay, so you spend a year in the complex in Florida, let's say, or Arizona. The weather, again, is not a big adjustment. But then you go that next year to the Midwest League, especially. If you said, okay, that your next assignment is West Michigan, a lot of times those players would actually get held back in extended spring until May, just so they didn't turn into, they didn't freeze to death. And beyond that also, okay, the difference between becoming that jump to full season baseball in Florida, a lot of, again, and I don't want to make, Dominican Spanish and, like in Cuban Spanish and all, there are some, there's similar, it's like English and, British English and US English. It's not the same, right. But it's absolutely, from a cultural assimilation standpoint also, it's a little easier. If you're living in Florida, that's going to also be easier than it is if you're in Lansing, Dayton, pick your pick of your upper Midwest city. And again, to some extent, again, in California, warmer weather, that's a positive. The negative, potential negative to me is you've taken away rookie and short season ball outside of the complexes. Well, if you said what is the average makeup of a Pioneer League team? A lot of players in the Pioneer League is, it was players from, international signees, especially from Latin America, who it was kind of that stepping stone. Okay, so you went to the complex and then you went to a shorter season, so less adjustment period, but also kind of an in-between, like the Appy League, the Pioneer League, you were on your own, but it wasn't as on your own as you are in low class A, and so there was a little bit more, it was a kind of an adjustment period. That's going away. And also from a just purely baseball competition level, if you're a player who's better than you've outgrown the complex, but you may not be ready for low A, there's no in between for you now. And that could cause some, I think, negative development effects as well.
Gotcha. So Eric asks, how are the decisions made as to who came inside the tent and part of the 120 as opposed to being left on the outside of the tent? And so we've covered a few different pieces there, and obviously a lot of preference was given to facilities. The other part that I'll add is that the big league clubs were given a lot of latitude to, if they liked their affiliate, they were given the opportunity to keep their affiliate. And so there was a market amount of stability, actually, in a period of intense instability. It's weird to say, but you look at the White Sox, you look at the Cubs. Yes, they have fewer affiliates, but they kept who they had. They weren't moving around, and so there was a lot of stability. What else would you add to that, JJ?
That was the overarching one. And even when that caused, the focus that they talked about on this, going through this, was facilities. They wanted to have, MLB continually talked about, they want to reduce travel, make travel more logical, bring teams closer to their home MLB club, which reduces travel also, make the leagues more geographically contiguous, and make sure that they were playing in top-notch facilities. The one that ended up being the overarching one beyond everything else was the desire of the MLB club. And the reason I say that is you look at Bowling Green, Kentucky. The Rays wanted to be in Bowling Green. Bowling Green does not fit geographically. When they say they want to reduce travel, the minute you put Bowling Green in any league in Class A, you have made your travel much harder. Because they have Bowling Green, we have a 7-team South Division and a 5-team North Division in a high A league, and which is never good because you have teams stretching from Georgia to New York and New Jersey and Kentucky, and someone has to always be playing each other. Like if you had 6 and 6, okay, the North's going to play each other, the South's going to play each other, and nary the two shall meet, or we'll send one series a year or whatever. No, they have to always be playing each other. But the desires of the MLB team, as you said it, if you want to keep your affiliate, you get to keep them. So the teams that were left out, the overarching thing. There were some where it was like the facility was just simply not ever going to make it. There were others, where they were saved by getting a new stadium. Hello, Beloit. A new stadium kept Beloit in where Beloit would not have been in before this.
Right.
But beyond that, the sad reality of it in many cases was it was almost like if you didn't have a partner, you were in trouble. I can't tell you that Kane County, I can't give you a good reason why Kane County is out and some of the teams in the Midwest League are in, other than they didn't have that MLB team that said, we want to be in Kane County. And at the end of the day, if everyone else has a partner, then, and again, I should throw one other thing. There was political considerations as well on this. Especially you had some U.S. senators, who took a very strong interest in this, and they generally did very well for their, their constituents. And there were others who may have less interest or less power, but that also played a fact in this. You were not going to see every team leave Iowa when you have senators who have long-term, maybe presidential aspirations, and Iowa holds the Iowa caucus.
We've got a question about player pay. It's certainly been presented that minor league players are going to see a wage increase this year. I would caution folks from drawing the conclusion that 1 + 1 = 2. I think that was an opportunity for Major League Baseball along the way, and now there's a convenience because there are fewer players under contract. There's several questions, and neither of us is a lawyer, JJ.
I'm not.
But we're great at speculating. So there's several questions on the legal side here. A few folks asking about, are there going to be lawsuits filed? Do we think that there may be a possibility of Major League Baseball's antitrust exemption eventually coming under scrutiny as a result of these changes?
Okay, so let's take the two separate. So the lawsuits, there have been already a couple of lawsuits. Staten Island was the first one to sue. We have had also Tri-City sue since then. There is the possibility that other teams left out. If you are part of the 120, for one, you're probably not going to sue because you're part of the 120, but you cannot sue now. To sign a PDL, you had to sign a legal waiver that ensures that you will not sue Major League Baseball. So those teams are out of the possibility of suing. But if you were left out, you can sue. The hurdles are pretty immense, though. And the main reason being, as we talked about at the start, this was a professional baseball agreement. The only relationship that Major League Baseball had was that their representation was that unless they made additional representations in some way to some team in the process, they only agreed that they would provide affiliates through the end of a current professional baseball agreement. That professional baseball agreement expired at the end of 2020. And so their argument legally is we had no further obligation. We are not preventing these teams from operating. We are just simply saying that we will no longer be affiliated with them if, and they can point to examples, the Kane County Cougars are going to continue to operate even though they're, and by the way, if in the cases of these teams going to these other leagues, if you are receiving MLB assistance to do so, you also sign a waiver of legal liability to where you can no longer sue. So Tri-City joined the Frontier League, did not take, MLB offered to pay their admission fee, their expansion fee into the Frontier League. Tri-City did not take it so that they then retained the right to sue. But Staten Island's a unique case there because Staten Island, the owners of the Staten Island Yankees bought their team from owners of the New York Yankees. And there were some representations made there that may give them a little bit more of a legal leg up to do this over the average team. But that's the hurdle there. So that's A. The antitrust exemption. This is the tricky part about this. If you are a minor league team, the antitrust exemption is better for you than it is for Major League Baseball. And this is something I understand that fans, this is hard to kind of fathom, but Scott used to work with the St. Paul Saints. Well, why the St. Paul Saints were they independent? Because there were rules restricting where territories that affiliated teams could move into. Well, so what is it you have as a minor league team? What is your biggest asset? It's the lease and the territory that you own the rights to. take away the antitrust exemption, and a team can open up wherever right down the road from you, and there's nothing you can do about it because that would be violation of antitrust rules. And so if you take that away, that was never really a big weapon for minor league baseball in this because, and the flip side of it is if you're MLB, I'm not saying that the antitrust exemption does not provide some benefits for you because it absolutely does. However, they also have the model that they can look at NBA, NFL. Those leagues do not have an antitrust exemption, and they haven't seen a whole lot of free franchise movement. They've had a little bit. You saw Seattle leave to go to Oklahoma City in the NBA. You've seen Al Davis move the Raiders on multiple occasions. But there's not a whole lot that those leagues have lost because they do not have an antitrust exemption. So I just don't think, and by the way, there's also been talks of taking away baseball's antitrust exemption. Next year will be the 100th anniversary, I believe, of the antitrust exemption.
It will.
And we've never seen it taken away. I'm skeptical that it's going to change anytime soon.
So final question. Do you expect that any of these changes, whether it's reduction in the draft rounds, fewer affiliates, which means additional players in the pool, so to speak, do you think that will fundamentally change the relationship that indie ball clubs and leagues have with regard to selling player contracts on to big league clubs?
That's one that there's a lot of that seems like it is to be determined. Okay, let's look at this like three different ways. One, could indie ball become much more like, I mean, could we see player loans? Or, like, could you, because by the way, you can now, never was before, but now MLB teams can own indie ball clubs. So, that the prohibitions and all, and minor league teams can own indie, all these prohibitions have gone away. So could you see, that the Cubs have more shortstops than they really have room for playing time. And so they loan a shortstop to an indie ball club or a partner league club. Or could it be something where, I mean, there's another way this could be approached. Okay. MLB wants this to be somewhat even, fair. I guess fair would be a better word. A fair right that all teams have to these players. Could it be something where you see that there ends up being, instead of it being that you sign players during the season, could there be a postseason draft, by which, much like, I mean, bringing everything full circle, much like what we had in 1903, where you said, this is the way that you bring talent in, especially like, okay, let's take the Pioneer League, for example, which is really kind of positioning itself to be this league for players who would have been hopefully drafted under a previous rules. If we go to 20-25 round draft, we were at 50 a decade ago. We were at 40 until 2019. So if that's the case, the Pioneer League, really is trying to aim to say, here are these good college players. In most cases, there are other players too, but good college players. We're going to bring them into our league. And some of these players, the cream's going to rise to the top. Well, under the system as it currently exists, teams could sign those players whenever they want. And that may be the best way for the player. It may be the best, or it may not. It may be that a better way to do it, and I don't have the answer for this, is to say, no, we want these players to play a full season. And at the end of the season, we'll have a draft. And so teams can pay a certain amount of money to be part of this draft, and then they can draft the players, which, by the way, I mean, there are going to be future big leaguers in those leagues. I mean, there's no question about that.
Right.
And so is that a way that you could see that being done? We don't have an answer for that yet. I mean, we don't have an answer right now for when the complex leagues are going to start playing. Like there's a lot that's, kind of being ramped up for 2021 because of all these transitions. We don't have, who the regional supervisors are going to be running these things, all these, there's a lot to be done. We now have schedules, thankfully, but there's a lot to be kind of figured out. But how talent is going to flow from these partner leagues back and forth, because the other way too, like, I mean, could you have drafts, dispersal? We don't, there's a lot of questions.
If you have a shortstop at an indie ball club and somebody's short because of injuries or whatever, could you loan them into their system, right? So could you do reverse and recall, right?
I can make a legal argument that you should be able to, from the standpoint of these are partner leagues. Okay, this is a SABR. I mean, let's geek out on this. The Mexican League has been a part of the National Association for years, for decades, but it's considered a AAA league, but it's separate. It's not something where, but MLB teams have been able to loan players to the Mexican League, and so those have been loans. I think one of the most famous examples in recent years, relatively recent years, Joaquin Soria was loaned by the Padres to a Mexican League team. That's where the Royals saw him and then drafted him, in the Rule 5 draft. So could you have loans? Yeah, like, okay, you know what? We're not going to sign this player, but we're going to loan him to you. And they'll, I don't, there are possibilities for things like that.
Excellent. Well, we've gone 90 minutes. We had, at one point, we had about 110 people in here. So I'm really appreciative to everybody who took time out of their Friday afternoon to join us. JJ Cooper, executive editor of Baseball America, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun, my friend. And hopefully we'll find something fun like this to do again.
This was fun. Thank you, Scott. And thank you, everyone. I know we didn't get to every question. Thank you for the, I'm sorry we weren't able to in an hour and a half, but I'm verbose. I apologize on that, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody.